we begin reading a chapter, in no matter it's science or social studies, we want to look at how the chapter is organized and the clues that they give us on things that are important. As we look at our chapter 7, lesson 1, we could see that our title, Kingdom of Living Things, is in big bold letters. In other words, this lesson is going to be about how are we going to classify things in their different kingdoms. We notice it also says main idea. This is the main idea that they want us to learn in this chapter, overall what we need to learn. And then I'm going to have subtitles. I can see the first subtitle is in big bold red letters. It says the 6 kingdoms. So here this will let us know that automatically how many kingdoms are there. Okay? It does tell us that the earth is home to millions of species of living things. And how are we going to keep track of all these things? So scientists are going to use some type of logical way to determine how we're going to put different things into different groups. We're going to learn that they're going to use a system which is called a Dichotomous Key. This is a tool that we're going to use to identify organisms based on contrasting pairs of characteristics. So the largest category of system of each system is called a kingdom. You can think of a king with everybody that's underneath the king. Scientists, depending on who you talk to, but in our book, they've classified them into 6 different kingdoms. We have 2 different kingdoms for bacteria. We'll go into more detail about those later. We have 1 kingdom each for protists, 1 for fungi, those are like funguses, plants, and animals. Now, to define each group and their kingdom into subgroups, scientists are going to look at not just what they look like on the outside, which we call external structures, but they're also going to go look inside, even down to the cellular level sometimes, to see what makes this living thing different from another living thing. And scientists will use this information to later on determine how things are related and how closely they are related. So if we look at the picture down below, we have 2 different types of animals there. As a scientist, we can look on their outside structure and I can see that some have horns and some don't. Their coloring is a little bit different. Their size is a little bit different. And I'm going to look at a lot of other things to determine what makes each one unique. All right, on this page, next page, we're going to find out what do they mean by classification. Scientists use what we call here a dichotomous key. Dichotomous means to divide into 2 parts. So when we're using a dichotomous key, this is a tool that just asks a series of yes-no questions. So if we look at the example on this page, the very first question they happen to be asking is this a single-cell organism? If the answer is yes, we go on to our next question, does it have a nucleus in this cell, yes or no? And if the answer is no, our next question is, does it make its own food? If the answer is no, that means it must eat somehow or get nutrients somehow. So it could be either an animal, it could be a fungi, or it might be a tree. So this is a very simple dichotomous key that we just keep asking a series of yes-no questions to get our answers. And in this page, we're going to be learning that there are 2 kingdoms. And what's important with bacteria is they're usually single-celled. They lack a nucleus, and they're the most numerous type of organisms. In other words, there's bacteria everywhere. Okay? Usually when we think about the word bacteria, we think of something that's bad, but really most bacteria are good. There's only a few bad ones, and they give all the other bacteria a bad name. But if we look at the picture here on the left, these are Archaebacteria. They're used to make things that we love to eat, like pickles and sauerkraut. and the bacteria will make an acid that will give that food that special flavor that we like. Okay, they're round shape. Sometimes they'll join together in clusters. Those are what we use for helping with our meal preparations. Other bacteria are rod-shaped bacteria. These are called bacilli. They're commonly found in water and in the dirt that we're playing in. And we also have these worm-like bacteria. You will have to know the shapes of these types of bacteria for the test because it will be on there. Now, bacteria are really small. What we have to make sure we understand is they are all single-celled organisms. They do not contain a nucleus, and for that reason, bacteria are called prokaryotic cells, which means before a nucleus. These are some of the smallest living things. It takes about 10,000 of these bacteria lined up end to end to make a distance of 1 centimeter. So if you look on a ruler on the metric side, 1 centimeter is not very long. They're the most common form of life on Earth, and bacteria for human beings are important because they help with our digest food in our stomach and our intestines. And if we didn't have that good bacteria in us, we'd be in a lot of trouble. Of course, some other bacteria are pretty bad. If you've ever had strep throat or a cavity, you know that those are also caused by bacteria. These bacteria just happen to be bad. Okay? The two types of bacteria are divided up into two kingdoms, Archaebacteria and Uk Bacteria. Now, the two types of bacteria that there are the Archaebacteria, meaning the ancient bacteria. In other words, these bacteria have been around for as long as the Earth has been around, practically. They can live under conditions that for most other living things would kill them. So we can find them in places where we wouldn't even think that anything alive could be there. Either there's no oxygen, or it's too hot, or too salty, or too something, but somehow these ancient bacteria seem to be able to live there. Scientists are now thinking about just calling them RK for short. The most common types of bacteria that we know of are the UK bacteria. They cannot survive in these extreme conditions. We've heard of E. coli. E. coli is what we have in our intestines, and it's also what gives us food poisoning. Again, UK bacteria have only one cell, but the functions inside that cell are very complex. They get their food different ways. Some of them get it from the sun's energy to make food. They use the sun's energy. Others get their food from eating living or non-living materials. So if we look down here at the picture below, these men are using a special type of bacteria to help clean up oil spills. So as we can see, bacteria are very useful. And again, why are all these bacteria both in common? They both are single-celled organisms with no nucleus. Next, we'll talk about the Protist kingdom. Now, what's unusual about the Protists is that it's hard to determine, is this a plant or an animal or a little bit of both? So scientists had to make a new kingdom to keep these organisms in because they don't really fit into either a fungi, a plant, or animal kingdom. The organisms in this kingdom are very different from one another. There's 60,000 different known species at least. But what they do have in common is that most, notice I said the word most, are single-celled organisms like bacteria, but they do have a nucleus. The cells of the protist also have special functions that they perform, that they can transform food into energy. Now, usually we will hear about animal-like protists. These are called Protozoa, which means first animals. At first, scientists classified these as animals, but later on, after more observations, they had to put them in their own group. But because they make their own food from their surroundings, they did not fit into that they can't make food, they don't fit into that plant kingdom. Most protozoa move through their environment where they are. They live wherever there's water or moist soil. Now, what I do want you to notice is the picture at the far left, this purple picture up here, this Paramecium. All these has little tiny hairs that move, and that helps it, like little oars on a boat, move through the liquid that it's in. And whenever you take a science test, they're going to give you a picture that looks like this, and they're going to ask, what is it? And you'll know that's a protozoa, because that's a classical picture that they will use on tests. Of course, there are also amoebas, which use this is a pseudopod or false foot. That's another type of protist. Probably one of the most common that you know are called algae. These are plant-like protists, and pretty much algae produce almost all the oxygen, much more than trees, that we use for breathing. So algae are very important for the survival of all living things on our planet. And then we have the ugly, gross slime mold, which is a fungus-like protist that kind of oozes over things. Here we have some more algae. Remember, algae are those plant-like protists. These ones use energy from the sun to create their own food. And the byproduct, which means what's left over after they use up the sun's energy, is oxygen. So these plants are very important to us. These plants are all microscopic for the most part, but some of them grow very big. They attach together, and that's what we call seaweed. They can grow as tall as trees in the ocean. They kind of act as a fungi or a fungus, some of them, and they get their food from their surroundings. They produce spores to reproduce like fungi do, and many can move from place to place, but very, very slowly. Okay. The fungus-like protists have a pretty negative effect on human beings and animals. These are the kinds of things that attack our vegetables and fruit crops. And if you ever had an aquarium and they got that stuff called ick, that fuzzy growth on their fins, that the fish is going to die, it's because of these microscopic organisms that are attacking your fish. Our next kingdom we're going to talk about is the Fungi Kingdom, or fungus. What's important is the cells have a nucleus and they have complex cell structures. How do they eat? They absorb their food from their surroundings and they decompose it. Fungi grow very fast. You know, in your yard, you wake up one morning and then there's a bunch of fungus on your grass, and you wonder, where did those come from? They weren't there yesterday, because they grow so fast. The fungi family comes in a variety of sizes and shapes. They can range from a one-celled organism to something that's more than a foot across. There's more than 7,000 different types of fungi. Like other kingdoms, except for bacteria, fungi have a nucleus in their cells. Their cell walls are actually made of the same hard shells as insects. Like I mentioned before, they absorb nutrients from their environment and they break it down. Fungi cannot move from place to place, but they sure can grow quickly. And if you've ever had one of those really kind of dry-looking fungus in your yard and you kick it and it looks like a cloud of black smoke, those are the spores that we see here in the picture below. If we look at the mushroom life cycle, we'll start off with the stalk, which is what grows. That's kind of like the trunk. And then we have the cap. And when you hit that cap, little tiny spores will go flying out into the air and be carried really, really far away. The spores land on the ground or on the surface of something like a rotten tree, anything like that. And they start forming a mycelium, and the mycelium will grow into a new mushroom. Very, very quickly. Lesson 1, what should we know? We should know that all organisms fall into one of the 6 kingdoms. Remember, there are 2 bacteria, the Archaebacteria, or those ancient bacteria, the Uk Bacteria, which are the most common ones that we know of. Remember, there are Protists, which are those single-celled, usually things like algae. Fungi, those are the mushroom groups, either plants or animals. We do have to remember that the bacteria are all single-celled. That's important to know for the tests. And also that they lack a nucleus. These are the only kingdom that lacks a nucleus in their cells. Protists, what we have to know about them is they do share characteristics of plants and animals and fungi. And since they're in that wishy-washy group, we put them all together with the protists. And we have to remember that the fungi are going to absorb their nutrients from their environment, and they grow pretty much almost overnight. Whenever you read these chapters, make sure you look at those review questions. The main idea: what are 2 goals of the system used to classify organisms? Remember, we use a dichotomous key, and why do we do that? Why is it important for us to even classify these things? So look over the rest of these review questions, and we will talk about them in class as well.